Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Divorceapalooza. What do you do when you have a temporary order in place or you have multiple orders in place and your ex is not sticking to the order? In other words, your ex isn't adhering to the parenting time schedule that you set up. Your ex isn't paying the child support that he or she is supposed to pay. What do you do? That's what we're going to talk about today. My guest is Liz Wakeman, and Liz is a divorce attorney and the founder of Wakeman Law Group. I want to tell you, if you're watching this, Liz has been a divorce attorney for over 30 years. Her practice is in the Northwest suburbs of Chicago. And hi, Liz.
Hi, Jackie. Happy New Year.
Same to you. So I want to tell everyone watching that you wrote this wonderful article for Divorce Girl Smiling called My Ex is Not Sticking to the Court Order. What do you do? And the reason it's so important is this happens kind of a lot. So, Liz, what are some of the reasons that people don't stick to the court order? Let's start there.
I find that there's a wide variety of reasons. With respect to support, it's often that the person who's obligated to pay will feel like they can't afford to pay. And I say feel like because they're often spending money on other people, other activities, rent and new furniture and things like that. So they really can afford it. They're just choosing not to afford it. So that's one thing with the with child with support maintenance and financial issues. But I often find that with parenting time issues, it's less deliberate and less intentional, and it's more about trying to test the boundaries and trying to see what actually works. And it's often driven even by the children, where the kids say, "Can we stay another hour?" And someone will legitimately think, "Well, I can bring them back in half an hour; it'll be fine."
Okay, so when it's kind of new, whether it's temporary or you just got divorced and this order's in place, what you're saying is like everyone's kind of testing. Do we really have to do this? Not everyone, but people who don't stick. They could be like kind of testing you. Is she going to be pissed? Maybe next time they push the envelope and it's 2 hours. Then they push it and say, oh, the kids decided they want to stay here overnight again. Is it okay if I bring them back in the morning? So everyone's still getting used to everything. But what people don't realize is when you have a court order, you have to stick to it.
Right. And then there's a balance between that because with parenting time, I always say that people should practice different schedules to see what works. And that's why I'm reluctant to get orders entered regarding parenting time until you really know what is going to work.
Liz,
Because,
that is
like,
so important. What a great divorce attorney to think that, because not all divorce attorneys think that way. And you're right. Tell me if you think I'm right. When people feel like they had something to do with the decision, when they know what's realistic, like why ask for my kids 5 days a week when I work full time and travel? You might feel guilty for not having your kids in that schedule. You might think, oh, I'm a bad mom. But then you see reality and you know that it's better for the kids to do like a 50-50. That's a scenario.
exactly. And I always give an example of a very good friend and former client from many years ago who said she absolutely had to have Sunday nights because that was family night. That was family day. That was getting ready for the week. And then in the course of trying to find what worked, one night she capitulated and gave up on Sunday nights, and she loved having Sunday to herself. So for the next 15 years, she never had her children on a Sunday except Mother's Day because she loved having Sundays to herself.
And see, that's just such a beautiful example of sometimes change can be the best thing, even if you didn't even want the change.
Right. And that's why I'm less argumentative and less firm on parenting time disruptance, disturbance, because a lot of good can come from that. But I think on the financial points, you need to bring a petition for contempt right away to make sure that boundaries are set and firmly followed.
Okay, we're going to get to that in a minute, but what are some other reasons why people might not stick to the court order? And let's just talk finances. And one thing you wrote here is they might be angry or resentful at the spouse, so they're trying to stick it to you. So it's an emotional thing. It's not even about the money. It's about mind games and trying to make you worry or something like
Right. I
that.
think it's a lot of, it's very often an emotional thing and a way to exert control, make your position clear, and just cause someone to squirm. And then that results, if it's a temporary in particular, results in people agreeing to things they shouldn't agree to for the permanent decision because they felt threatened and coerced during the temporary time.
And, on the opposite, they might be getting along so well with their ex that they're like, "Oh, we're on such friendly terms. Maybe she won't even notice if I don't pay," or something like that. So that could happen too.
And that is a false sense of security.
Yes. And also, what about the people who say, "Well, I'm not gonna pay because she knows it's gonna cost more to go back to court. So I'm just not gonna pay because she's not gonna pursue it." Now, Liz, does it cost more to go back to court, or in these cases, do lawyer fees get paid if the person isn't paying?
Lawyers' fees can be paid if the person isn't paying. And in fact, the statute says that if someone is found to have been in contempt, that they are required and they shall pay the attorney's fees. But there are also, again, emotional issues. So bringing somebody back to court feels like you're rocking the boat. Maybe something else is more important, as you've discussed so many times. Sometimes something else is more important, so you'll be willing to acquiesce on one point. That's where it's really important to talk to your attorney, your divorce coach, your therapist, what's really important and what fights to battle. And I I just had a situation where somebody's short paid by $200. I don't think that it's worth it to go back to court for the $200. We'll make it up at the end.
Absolutely. And I use this example a lot. I once went to court to get $2,000 and spent 10,000 to get the 2.
Yes, I've heard that
So,
example. That's
mhm, mhm. All right. So let's get into what is the first thing you do if your ex is not paying?
call your attorney
Just pick up the phone and call or send
or
an
send
email.
an email because it's easier for attorneys to respond to emails usually.
All right. But Liz, you say in your article, talk to your ex. Is that not, did we forget?
Oh, I forgot. Well, I'm assuming that that's already failed, that you've said,
Oh, okay.
hey,
Well, let's back up
hey,
and talk
yeah,
about it. So, the first thing is talk to your ex because you don't want to even spend any attorney's fees or even get your attorney involved if you can work it out with your ex. Pro-
absolutely.
but what you're saying is most people can't, or maybe they can.
Or they don't, or they do, and it fails.
And at least you know you tried.
Exactly.
So, how does that conversation go?
Hey, I see that you didn't pay, or you're short paid, or you returned the children late. Can we talk about how we can avoid that in the future? What's the obstacle? Did you have the right account information? Um, was it not clear where we were supposed to do the return? What happened?
Thank you so much for your attention to this matter.
Yes,
Okay. All
yes,
right. So let's say that fails. You call your attorney and you say, I've, because the first thing your attorney is going to say is, have you talked to your ex about it? What is the reason that he or she is saying?
right. And
Okay.
yes, that's definitely what I wrote in the article and what I do in my practice. I jumped ahead of myself for today.
Okay. That's
So,
okay. All right. So then you have a couple choices. Your attorney can either send you to mediation or what? Just set up, call his or her attorney and say, okay, we have an issue here. Which one is better? What do you do, Liz?
so for violations of very clear orders, I don't usually suggest mediation because if that initial conversation failed and mediation is not required for violations of orders, I would say get right to having something filed because it it saves attorney's fees and it saves the cost for a mediator. But if it's not something that's in a clear order, then you do need to go to mediation. And it is wise to go to mediation.
And also, if the person isn't paying, jumping to mediation is probably not the answer in most cases because it was already settled upon. The numbers were already put together. You went through a whole mediation thing and now unless it's at the beginning of the divorce and it's temporary and so why go back? There's
Right.
clearly a reason the person maybe their circumstances changed. Well, you don't need to go to mediation for that. They can just tell you. If you ask them, why didn't you pay? The person might say, well, I just lost my job. I didn't want to tell you. Well, now we're in a whole different ball game. So maybe you could
Totally
say to
different
your
person.
ex, right? You could just say, well, I didn't know that. I'm so sorry. Maybe you could just pay what you can for a little while.
But
Or
be
maybe the
careful about
person,
saying that, because if you do that, then you set a precedent. And then it can be found that you acquiesced, so someone won't be found in contempt if you've acquiesced. So there's a
okay,
risk to that. That's why it's important to talk to your counsel about this. The other
right.
thing is, very often, especially in the temporary orders, somebody will say, well, you owed me $120 for the football gear, and I owed you this, so I deducted it. And I think it's important at the onset, particularly during the temporary time, to have a clear process for doing those things. It's fine to net it out, so to speak, but there should be a clear process of using a like our Family Wizard or some other app to do these calculations and to have a clear record of what's happened, so people aren't deducting things they shouldn't be deducting.
Okay, I have 3 things to say that I wrote down. First of all, great, great, great point because this happened to me a lot over the years of my divorce. He would just deduct, and it drove me crazy because that's not what the, order said, and we should have had a plan in place that said, "If you're going to go above and beyond, please let me know, and we'll split it, and I'll give you the money back." Some type of thing. I love that you brought up Our Family Wizard because it's a great way to do that and to keep track of all the expenses. The other thing is if I want to go back to the part where we talked about the person losing their job. So if the person loses their job but they have like $700,000 in savings in the bank, maybe the child support amount is not going to get lowered because they can pay it out of savings. How does that work?
That's exactly true. That's exactly something to be considered. And that's important. Another reason why it's important not to simply acquiesce without getting expert advice on that, because I have had
Yeah.
people acquiesce and then the court said, well, you agreed to it, so it's not contempt.
And people listening, we know that you probably feel really bad about it and maybe guilty, which you should not feel guilty because you're not working or something. But like Liz said, this is very good advice. If you acquiesce, you are basically letting the person you're giving them the space to go further, push the envelope further. Now they're thinking she feels sorry for me. What else can I get away with? So you really have to keep it businesslike because remember that the money is for your children. It's not for you to have nicer things and to upgrade your lifestyle. It is for your children. So, the less guilty you feel, unnecessary guilt, the better off you're going to be being really good at sticking to what you set up by the law.
That is such an important point, because I hear so often, I don't need to have child support or maintenance because I don't want to hurt him. It's not hurting him, it's what's equitably defined in the statute. It's what other people have determined is a good general overall plan for a family.
All right, Liz, I want to bring up one more point because we're kind of out of time, but you wrote here a good piece of advice that I love. Do not talk about this with your kids or tell your kids daddy didn't pay. Why is that a bad thing? I mean, that's kind of a loaded question.
The kids should not be involved in any financial discussions. And frankly, I don't even think the children should be involved in most parenting time discussions directly, maybe indirectly with parenting time. But for financial circumstances, they should just never be included in those discussions. They should be able to be children and have education and fun and friends as their priorities and not worrying about who's paying what.
It's a big burden to put on the kids. Really is.
Right.
Liz, thank you so much. I love all of your advice. Thanks for being on Divorceapalooza.
Thank you, Jackie.
If you want to reach Liz for a consultation or you're thinking of changing attorneys or you need an attorney, you can find Liz at wakemanlaw.net. You can also find her in the trusted professional section of Divorced Girl Smiling. Thanks again for listening, everyone.